Let's go on the record. Good evening. Welcome to baseball night in Shelburne. Good for the kids. Good for the kids. This is the meeting of the Shelburne Board of Civil Authority for Monday, July 8th at 7:06 p.m. or thereabouts. I'll call the meeting to order. I'm Tom Little, the chair of the Board of Civil Authority. Looking at the agenda from a high level, we have two main business items tonight. The continuation of a hearing that started on June 24 of a tax appeal for two properties, and then a review of the checklist, which every other year Vermont law obliges the town to do, and the Board of Civil Authority takes the lead role in doing that. Before we move into that, however, there's an item on the agenda for public comment about anything of interest to the public. I should add that the tax appeal hearings are a quasi-judicial proceeding, and we're not permitted by the law that applies to quasi-judicial hearings to take public comments about the tax appeals. But if there's any other issue that someone would like to raise during public comment, please identify yourself and let us know. If not, is there anybody on the board who would like to disclose any conflict of interest or any other matter that might relate to the conflicts of interest or potential conflicts of interest, in addition to what was already disclosed on June 24th? Seeing none, that takes us to the tax appeals and our process established under our rules of procedure, which guide us during this process. Let me just find those. We are struggling a bit with. Okay, thank you. All right. The properties on appeal are 132 and 142 Penny Lane. Chris Pratt is the property owner and is the appellant. And Mr. Pratt, do you have any questions about the process or procedures for this evening?
Can you hear me okay? Yeah, I guess my main question is, when this is over and the disposition is finalized, will it be detailed? Detailed. Last time I went through it just said denied in a checkbox. I just want to make sure that, or I just am questioning, is there going to be a detailed response?
What we anticipate, what our practice is that once we conclude the taking of testimony this evening, a site inspection committee will be appointed and set up a time to look at the properties inside and out. We have a date for what's the date for the next meeting? August 5, that group will inspect the property and then deliberate and write up a detailed proposal that will come back here on August 5, and we will chew on that and decide what we think about it and come to a consensus and take a vote. And that's usually a pretty detailed process in writing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Our practice is to allocate about 30 minutes, half and half, for the assessor and for the property owner. Under our rules, I'll now ask the assessor to introduce the property by describing it and its present valuation, and then we'll ask Mr. Pratt to present his view of the valuation and supporting evidence. Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Ted Nelson. I'm your assessor, and the two properties in order of address are. You want this?
No, I want you to speak into it.
Are 132 Penny Lane and 142, as the chair said. 132 is current value is $39,200. We did give you a presentation that shows the breakdown of that. It includes $9,500. It's on. I'll start numbering these pages, but it's the 6th page in this document that shows the current value of $39,200. Mobile home itself is in at $9,500. There's a unit site value of $28,700, and there is a deck that Mr. Pratt's put up for himself and friends between the two units for $1,000. The second property is 142 Penny Lane. Current value of that is $48,200. Again, at about the same place. There's a value in the mobile home of $18,300, $28,700 for the unit site value, 1/64 of the park itself, and then $1,200 for a shed. Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Pratt, you have the floor. This is your opportunity to give us your evidence and facts. We have your written opening statement and the attachments to it, so we'll take that into evidence and carefully review it. But you have the floor now to give us your view of the value of the properties.
Mr. Chair, Sandy Combs on behalf of Mr. Pratt. Just a point of information, if I may. Mr. Pratt sent in on July 1st, I believe it was 6 pages, and it was entitled Dear BCA. And Mr. Pratt's going to be having an opening statement, and those 6 pages in tonight's packet go together.
Okay.
So it's attachment 1 is on the first document, and attachment 6, 7, 8, and 9 are on the second document. The other thing we want to say is that he apologizes in advance for his disability and his slurring. He acquired a brain injury from surgery in '97, and he's got some lingering deficits, so he's not as sharp as he used to be. So we would just appreciate a little bit of consideration with any questions and or possibly a little bit of latitude on time.
Is that it?
Yep.
What I said in my opening statement is this appeal is really not about, it's about fairness and justice. It's not about a personal financial gain. Whether I win or lose, it's really, if I which way does it go here? If I win?
Just read it. Just read it.
Yeah, it's not fair. Yeah. If I win, the co-op makes up the taxes by increasing my lot rent. If I lose, I pay the town directly the taxes. So it's kind of a 6 of one, half a dozen the other. It's really, what upset me most was the fairness and justice of the way this statute was designed. In my opinion, the statute, VSA 610, is unfair and is being significantly misinterpreted by the Shelburne tax assessor. Issue 1 is land ownership versus land rental, which I said in my original process. My principal objection to this whole thing is that I own no land here. The parcel of land in question, the parkland, was purchased by Lakeview Cooperative from Lake Champlain Transportation. Lakeview Cooperative is the legal owner of this land and is registered as such. I am not a member of Lakeview Cooperative. This was stated in June 21st in my overview, which is attachment 1. The co-op it's also verified by my co-op membership resignation letter that's also in here as attachment 3 on January 21st. Was further acknowledged by the co-op itself when it notified me of my non-member lot rent, which is attachment 4. Finally, Ted Nelson's memorandum to the board on June 28th clearly states in line 5, the park value will be split among the co-op members. And last, the owner of the record as of April 1 is Lakeview Co-op. See attachment 5. Oh, I'm sorry, 9. So I'm like, how many ways do I have to say I don't own the land? How many ways do I have to say I'm not a member of the co-op? So that was kind of my basic problem. And then I felt, what legal right does the town assessor have to come along and reclassify a sales transaction, reclassify who is and who isn't a member who's already resigned? It just didn't add up to me. So I really will not pay taxes on land I don't own. And the next issue was lot size and lot characteristics. I know the statute says he can ignore those, but I don't think he can. I mean, the lots are really different. The characteristics assigned to them are really different. I don't think anybody has the right to come along and ignore all that, regardless of what the statute says. So this one-size-fits-all tax policy with no consideration for lot size and site characteristics is about as fair as the uniform rents were when they were assessed here. Right now, 5 owners enjoy the lot size of 12, but they pay taxes on 5. It's easy to understand why 2 of these 5 are co-op members, co-op board members, and have been since the inception. Schmidt on 216 is a triple lot owner, and Jordan on 379 is a double lot. So how many of you BCI board members, and this was the logic that hit me, have ever in your lifetime seen one lot that's 3 times larger than another? One lot has lake views and fences around it. One lot's looking at the lake and the other's behind a bowling alley. One's tiny and one's huge, and evaluate them as equal. I mean, there's just no way that I can justify that. So I also refer you to my overview statement in attachment 1. The last 2 paragraphs, I'm sorry I'm being so redundant here, but most of the lots are different. Some support double wide trailers, some support single wide trailers, some have double and triple lots, some have less land, some have more land, some have lake views, some do not. Some have seen significant capital improvements with decks, sheds, flowers, shrubs, soil, pools, landscaping, while some are barren and totally unimproved. Some even have co-op board approved fences surrounding their lot, which is far bigger than the average size lot. And it's been approved by the board. Smaller lots have been subsidizing the larger units with their rents for some time. Rather than eliminate this injustice, the co-op is now authorizing an additional tax injustice in my mind. There is nothing reasonable and fair about this new assessment. it's both misinterpreted and misapplied as I see it. That's Statute 11 VSA 1610. I urge the board members who come to look at these properties, the double-sized lot and see for yourself if they're not very different. In my opinion, lot characteristics must not be ignored, as they were by Ted's own admission in his memorandum, which is dated June 28th. There was no influence on the split on non-public information, such as either the site characteristics or the membership. Why not? I mean, why wouldn't we consider lot differences in site characteristics? And further, the town-owned assessor webpage, when describing the assessment process, states, land characteristics are also taken into consideration during the site visit. See attachment A, or 8, I'm sorry. This park is not condo-like land in common. This 164th, it's not a condo. Nobody owns this land in common with everybody else. They own a lot, or they charge rent for a lot. Individual lots are what owners and renters assume they have here, not land in common. My health site is described in the town's own May 6th Notice of Change. They say it quite well. This is a quote. A health site is that portion of a homestead that includes the principal dwelling and as much of the land surrounding the dwelling as is reasonably necessary for the use of a dwelling as a home. I mean, that's attachment 7. Everyone here treats their lots, the lots they rent as their land. Everyone originally bought their mobile homes with that understanding. We didn't buy our mobile homes with the idea that 1/64th of it is land in common. We bought it with lots. We bought it like people buy houses in a development. Anyhow, where the hell am I? Oh, I mow the. This is again. I mow the lawn on my lot. The lot I rent. I shovel the driveway on the lot. I grow food and flowers on it. I entertain on it. My family and friends enjoy it. This is my lot. For tax purposes. Oops, where'd I go? Oh, I do not watch the sunset on Miss Schmidt's lot at 216, or does she come and have a drink on my deck unless invited? I rent my lot, which is not equal to 1/64th of anything. For tax purposes and to eliminate lot boundary disputes here, which have already occurred, all lots should be measured or surveyed when necessary, recorded, and assigned an address. Lots need to be defined. Several perimeter lots, like mine. This is kind of an important concept. Everybody doesn't have to have a survey. Several of us have perimeter lots, meaning there's physical boundaries surrounding us. Like me, I have a road to the north and I have a brook to the south. And on both sides are trailers. I mean, it's pretty easy to take a tape measure and go from the road to the brook and go from one trailer to the next. I don't need a survey company to come do that. And there's several of us like that. So it doesn't have to be this really expensive survey. Now, some need it. Some should have it, but not all. The inequity of VCA 1610. Again, Ted references should justify his actions. It should be important to note this statute's 19 years old. It's never been applied anywhere in the state except here now. I think there's a good reason for that, because it's crap in my mind. I mean, I think it's easy to tear apart. I think it's full of holes, and a lot of people have shied away from it. But I may be wrong. But that's my knowledge. Nowhere does this statute say that the tax assessor can redefine a sale, ownership, or membership status of co-op members. The co-op will charge me rent as is so specified in attachment 4, where the co-op itself refers to me as a non-member lot renter. And lastly, this is kind of a biggie that doesn't relate to that, but a $15,000 miscellaneous adjustment was added to my property and all the residents in this park in 2008 on land which I do not own. Once again, Ted's own documents unveiled this injustice. See Ted's memorandum to the BCI board dated June 28th. 2 points are very clear. Since 2008, all 64 Lakeview mobile home park properties were increased in taxable value by $15,000. That's $960,000 a year, almost $1 million, due to a miscellaneous adjustment. That same year, LCT's park property was proportionally undervalued. Proportionally undervalued. That's in Ted's memorandum. Ted combined this $15,000 miscellaneous adjustment, along with the $13,700 in newly assessed land values to arrive at this figure of $28,700. This figure equals 1/64th ownership of the total price paid by the park, 1.8 something million divided by 64 units. In so doing, this is a really important, in so doing, he made it clear to all of us that this $15,000 miscellaneous adjustment was for land. Land we don't own. Land we never did own. So even if you forget about this new tax thing, if you go from 2008 to 2018, everybody in the park has been charged a miscellaneous adjustment on land they do not own. In summary, $28,000 of land tax assessment for my 132 and 142 Penny Lane homes does not apply to me. I own no land in Shelburne. VCA 16 proposes to ignore lot sizes and other characteristics when obvious differences exist. It is neither fair nor equitable, which has been the basis expressed in my original tax appeal. From 2008 to 2018, the town has been illegally charging me and all residents of Lake Mobile Home Parks taxes on land not of its own. I expect these miscellaneous adjustments to be dropped from my properties. Further, I expect a refund for each property I own for as long as I've been paying taxes on them. This miscellaneous adjustment has overvalued our homes and our tax base by $960,000 a year, 15,000 times 64 units. For 10 years, that's $9.6 million. I mean, we're not talking chicken feed. If you take the 2008 published tax rate, attachment 9, it is 1.9449%. That would equal $186,710 of illegally collected tax. We are all due tax refunds from the town of Shelburne for every year or the proper proportion thereof of taxes we have paid from 2008 to 2018. I'll be filing a claim for this at a later date. So that's my spiel. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Mr. Pratt, I think at the last hearing on June 24th, you were sworn under oath, and we consider you to still be under oath, but I think it might be a good idea, because Mr. Nelson wasn't there, I'm going to swear you all in again. Do you
Sure.
solemnly...
It's hard to hear some folks
Including me? Okay. No, anyone who expects to testify tonight, please raise your right hand. And do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you have given or shall give to the Board of Civil Authority this evening shall be truthful and complete, and the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yeah.
You do?
Yes.
Thank you. Under our rules, we now ask the assessor to respond to the information presented by Mr. Pratt. Then we have questions from the board members, and then we separately ask the assessor to present his valuation and supporting evidence, and ask Mr. Pratt to respond to that. So, Mr. Nelson, do you have any specific responses to this separate from what your own presentation will be, or do you want to? Okay, please.
Okay. One thing that I prepared, which is not new to you, but is more succinct, is a spreadsheet of everybody in the park. with, and you have this document in your packet with two exceptions. One is I've highlighted on this page Mr. Pratt's units. Oops. And you can see on the left-hand column of the two yellowed. I'm really not doing well, am I? Of the two yellowed lines that 132 went from 25.5 to 39.2. And this is in the packet for 132 Penny Lane, but it's not in this format. It's not on one sheet of paper, it's on two. So this is a little easier to read. And 142 went from 34.5 to 48.2. Now you asked if there is a response to the information you've received. I'd like to start at the end and work backwards. Something, of course, I wasn't here on your first meeting of this. I didn't know you were going to hear testimony, and thought that it was going to be to set a date for the hearing. But I'm hearing tonight from Mr. Pratt and Mr. Coombs, who's helping him, that there's interest in back payment for the $15,000. And I guess I would like to point out a couple things on these two highlighted bars. The first is that they both transferred within the recent past. Mr. Pratt's been an owner in the park for a year or two, depending on which unit you're looking at. A couple years in 142 and 2.5 years in 132. And I'd also point to the purchase price compared to the old value, which were very similar. Purchase price was a little over the old value and a little under the new value on 132 and 142 respectively. So I'm not sure that Mr. Pratt is due, and maybe this is not the right forum, but
Really, if he files an abatement request,
yeah,
or anyone else does, we'll take that up if and when it's filed.
that's fine. But I was asked to respond to his points, and I think that's something you should recognize. The other thing that changed here is down under 354. I noticed a mistake, and I corrected that. So the old and the new values that's highlighted in bold, and so as you can see, if you look down the column between the difference between the old and the new, the park itself went from 1,250,000 to zero, and everybody's site went up by 13.7 with a few exceptions. Lot 207 and lot 273. And again, this is not new information to you. You've had this for a couple weeks now. But I thought this was helpful to understand what I did to split the park into 64 pieces. And I simply took the purchase price and split it into 64 pieces and did not add $15,000 to that. It could have, been 28.7 plus 15 or 43,000. Folks from the park have come in since I started working here asking about the 15 grand. I directed them to the previous assessor because that was set on the base in 2008. Mr. Coombs, as he was looking at buying and after he bought, came in both before and after he became a property owner in town and asked about the 15,000. And I, again, directed him to Spencer Potter because there was no paper trail, no footprint on why this was done. We looked back in the records, and Marv Thomas's park used to have an assignment of value before the 2003 reappraisal, but what's now Shelburne Woods, Marv Thomas's park, began to decline, and in 2008 they did not assign a site value to the sites in Shelburne Woods. And the only other park we have is on Nashville Road off of the Spear Street, and there's nothing there. That's probably not as desirable now as the two parks that are owned by the co-ops. So what we did this April 1st is we tried to understand what our responsibility was. And we wanted to understand particularly what the nuances are if you live in one of these two parks, whether it be Lakeview or Shelburne Woods, and you are a resident of town, are you considered to be a part owner of the park in terms of your income sensitivity, which is your qualification for homestead? We have some people in Shelburne who get quite a bit of reduction in their, what would be their property tax bill from what's called a prebate. And about 75% of the Vermonters now get a prebate. So if you live in your house in your first 2 acres, and it's more than, I believe the law was set up, Act 60, to be more than 1.5% of your adjusted gross income, then you qualify for a prebate on your residential portion of your home. And it's to the point where some folks in the park even get a check from the town. They pay no property tax, from what I understand. I haven't looked at the specific names, but the prebate is very important to them. And when a mobile home park goes through a transition from being owned by a third party, an investor like Ray Pecor or Lake Champlain Transportation, who used to own the Lakeview Park, when it goes from there to being owner-occupied by residents through a co-op, then there could be the potential that the prebate may not qualify because the state tax department may consider the properties to be owned by the residents. And what they do in other parks where a third party owns the park is they file for what's called a renter rebate for that portion, and then a homestead rebate for their mobile home itself. So it's become complicated in terms of trying to make sure Vermont is an affordable place to live if you live in a mobile home park and you're a resident of that mobile home. And from what I understand, and talking to the state employee who directed me to this statute that's been around, as you've heard, for about 19 years, that was probably the intent of that legislation, was to help people make sure that if they're in a co-op, that portion of the park that they use is considered part of their homestead and house site for income tax or income sensitivity purposes. So we went through the exercise of saying, what do you do about a 64-unit park where some of the sites may be smaller, some of the sites may be more or less preferable? And 7 of the mobile homes are occupied by absentee property owners, like the 2 that Mr. Pratt owns. Whether he decides to move into one tomorrow and it's only one that's rented, it's certainly his prerogative. And the other 5 owners of the 7 that are rented, they have a perfect right to sell it or to move back into it or to continue to rent it. But they're not members of the co-op and they're not residents of Shelburne at this point, at least not in Lakeview Mobile Home Park. We did not want to get ourselves into the position where we said every other year or every year we call up Mr. Moran, who's the president of the co-op, or whoever's the president in 2022, and say, who's a member and who's not? Because if there is an incentive to be a member, say the homestead, the resident school tax rate drops below the non-resident tax rate, so they have new members. You know, we're always, it seems like we're administratively chasing people who are residents and making sure we don't leave out people who are not residents. In other words, we're concerned that the tax structure may be gamed, possibly, or that we may not have accurate records of who is a member and who is not a member of the co-op, because that's very fluid. It could change anytime. Likewise, it's not only not a public record, but we don't think it's defined on the shape of the lots and the size of the lots. We know generally where the location is by 911 address, but we're not sure the shape and the size of the lots in the park itself, nor do we know the shape and the size of the lots in Shelburne Woods. So the 94 that were converted to taking the purchase price and splitting it either at 64 ways for Lakeview or 28 ways for Shelburne Woods are simply that, the purchase price divided by the number of units in the park. Our biggest concern is if there's a vacant lot, if there's you know, a mobile home that's been abandoned, or between the end of March and early April, a mobile home dealer pulls one off. It's an empty site for technically as of April 1st. And then in the middle of April, they move a new one back in there. What do we do? Well, what we've done in Shelburne Woods that has a higher vacancy rate is to assign that unit site value to the co-op. So for this year, as of April 1st, 2019, Shelburne Woods has 27 residents and one vacant lot. Then the value of that vacant lot goes to the co-op. And that's what we would do if someone did this in Lakeview. Other than that, we think that it would be an administrative nightmare, if you will, to try and figure out who's a member, who's not a member, and then assign some value more or less than an equal split of the 64. The sale price divided by 64. So try and say, okay, this is really 25 and this is really 30. Well, why isn't it 29.5 or why isn't it 24.5? And I just don't think that's a productive use, or we have a reasonable basis to assign that differential. So I'm not going to read you my memo or regurgitate what you've gotten from me. I don't have any other direct responses to what Mr. Pratt said. He's been a gentleman through the process. He represented himself last year at grievance, this year at grievance, and we had good dialogue. I think just on principle we differ, and so that's why it's in your lap. But I do have folks from the co-op. We have Shelburne Moran, who's the president of the co-op, and Vivian Jordan, if you'd like to ask questions of either of those folks or myself. And there's an organization called CDI that supports residents of a park going through the transition process of buying. I think, I don't know your name. Julia is here. So if you have questions about that, or myself, of course. But thank you.
It seems as though, Mr. Nelson, you have responded to the information presented by Mr. Pratt, which is G on our list of the flow, and you have also presented your own valuation and supporting evidence. Would that
Yes,
be
sir.
fair? Okay. So I think now is a chance for Mr. Pratt or Mr. Coombs to ask Mr. Nelson any questions that you might have about his testimony. And then we're going to open it up to the members of the board for the board's questions. Before I do that, it would be helpful, Mr. Pratt, if you could tell us on this aerial photo, which are your two properties?
If you look at Exhibit 5, that's
Yeah.
Exhibit 6, I believe.
Yeah,
Look at Exhibit 5, there's a blow-up of that. It's on the other packet I was telling you about. It's not in this packet, it's in the first packet. Yes. Yeah. So, we can come up and show you if you like.
why don't you just circle them or highlight them somehow?
Oh.
So what I've been shown here is, what's 216?
216 is a triple lot at the corner.
Who owns that?
Schmidt,
Okay, I'm just interested in the ones that Mr. Pratt owns,
132, 142.
which are on the north side. On the north side of the road.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got a brook behind it there.
Yeah. All right, well, I'll pass this around and people can.
Okay.
And then they're adjacent to each other.
Yes.
Yes, sir. And he does live there. I mean,
Yeah, I don't know where
he
that
lives in
came
both.
up. I live
Yeah,
in
he
both
lives
of
in
them.
both of those properties.
I don't know where that statement came from as like kind of, I'm a non-resident because I own them and my family comes and, you know, just because I don't live in both of them at the same time does not mean I don't use them. So, I don't know where that came from.
Okay. Okay, so now you have a chance to ask Mr. Nelson some questions or to respond specifically to his statements, if you wish.
I'll really be quite brief. To me, it's simple. You know, you own the land or you don't own the land. You tax the land and you don't. If there's no big discussion here, if the co-op owns the land and they tax for it and I'm not part of it, they make up for that in the rent. So it's not like anybody's ducking and getting out of this thing. I'm either a co-op member and I pay my portion according to this new formula that I kind of disagree with, or I'm not a co-op member and I pay higher rent. I mean, what's so complicated about getting a membership list and if they're not members, charging them more rent? I guess that's kind of how I look at it. The second point he mentioned, which I think is really important, is this $15,000. The $28,700 that he refers to is nothing more than the total purchase price that the co-op paid for the land divided by the number of units, which is 64. It was all land. And it was arrived at by taking the $15,000 that was already there from the miscellaneous adjustment and adding $13,700 to it to arrive at your $28,700. When he did that, he made it very clear this is all land that nobody owns. So, did you have anything?
Thank you. To open this up for questions now.
If you have a second.
Were you sworn under oath? Okay, okay. Well, I prefer that the way this should flow with Mr. Nelson, if you want to elicit some testimony from Mr. Moran, to ask him some questions or ask him to sort of direct his testimony. That's kind of how the rules are set up.
But please bear in mind, I'm not a lawyer, and there's 5 or 6
Don't
in the room,
apologize.
so if I mistake or trip on a chord or something, or my tongue, you know. All right.
I just had a question. At our previous meeting, there was an extended discussion about whether or not testimony like this was all right in this forum. So I'm just curious. So obviously it is all right.
Well, I think it's, if the assessor wishes to call a witness in support of the assessor's case, I think I made it clear that the assessor can do that. That's why I want this to be some questioning led by the assessor of his witness.
Okay, thank you. Ted Nelson. Mr. Moran, I just want to clarify that when the decision was made and the value went from 1.25 million to 0, that the budget for the lot rents was adjusted downward according to the board's decision not to tag people for, is that yes or?
Sure, I can address that, if I may, Mr. Chair.
That was
So,
my question.
so
I want to keep it brief.
I will. 6 weeks after we were incorporated, we were informed by Mr. Nelson of this new rule that the co-op cannot pay for its own taxes, which we had put into the budget, according to Rock Capital, our lender. We now had to have the 64 different units pay for each for their land. So we have, out of 64 units, there are 57 members. There are 5 non-members, which is mandated by the state since they are renters and grandfathered in. We cannot force them to be members. They can't be members. And then there's 1 person who chooses not to be a member. What we did was we took the $27,000 in the budget that we allotted for taxes so we could abide by the rule and gave it back to each tenant. All 64 units are getting a rebate of $35 on their rent. The rents were going to be much higher in order to meet the budget for, for buying the park. So instead of, for example, a member was going to be spending $358 in rent, we brought down their rent to $323, in essence giving them back $35 a month to pay $420 in taxes, which won't even come to that for each unit. So every unit, no matter a member, a non-member, or a refused member, gets $420 rebate per unit. That's really all I wanted to say as to the co-op membership. Everybody is treated the same, with the exception of the non-members have a $15 higher rent a month that was voted in by the membership under Vermont law. They can vote non-members at a higher rent. And that's why the rents as of right now for members are $323 and then $338 for non-members. But all of those get a rebate of $420 per unit. So if somebody owns 2 units, as we do one renter, as also Mr. Pratt does, they get $420 per unit back to pay for their rent. Thank you. To pay, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mary. Does that answer your question? Okay, thank you.
I have 2 questions, and then we'll open it up to the rest of the board. Mr. Pratt, do you have your own dollar value that you think your property should be assessed at? We've heard your analysis of why the assessor's number is wrong, but do you have a number that you'd like us to adopt for the assessed tax value for those 2 properties?
I guess I'd say 2 things. Number one, I think the 15,000 should be dropped from both of them. It's clearly land, and it's land I don't own. Number one. Number 2, it really doesn't matter, to be honest with you. If I pay for it directly, it's basically the same. If I pay it through the co-op, I'm a non-member, and they make up the taxes that I don't pay in my rent. They jack up the rent, just like he's. And this whole idea of a rebate is not really a rebate. I don't get money back. I just don't get charged as much. So it's kind of not quite the same. But in any case, it's 6 of one, half a dozen the other. So I'm not looking at, I'll do whatever I have to do. If I lose, you know, I'll pay you guys directly in taxes. If I win, my rent will be jacked up to make up for the taxes I'm not paying the co-op. So I pay for it in rent, or I pay it directly to the town in taxes. So the only thing that's a value issue is that there's $28,700, but as I say, the co-op will make that up. And the other is the $15,000 that of miscellaneous adjustment that no one has ever been able to explain. And I don't owe that. I don't claim rights to that for 2008 because I've only been an owner for 2 or 3 years. But whatever the portion of that time I've owned, I think I shouldn't have had to pay taxes on land I did not own. That's.
If I may, Mr. Chair, to help Chris just a teeny bit on this that Ted passed out, to answer your question directly, Mr. Pratt would like the 28.7 deducted from 39.2, and he would like the 28.7 deducted from 48.2. It's just that simple. That's the taxes.
What's the resulting grand list value?
Well, I would have to do the math on that.
So it's for number 130, for number 132, that would be
11, well, it would be 10.
$39,200 minus.
Yes, sir, that is correct. It'd be in 10 and change. 10.5?
Should be 39,200 minus what?
28,700.
28.7.
28,700.
For a result of 10.5.
Would that be the same thing on the 48 too?
Yes, sir. So that would be what, 19,
Whatever.
19.5.
And I contend that the 28.7 is land. If you want to make it up in rent, make it up in rent. But don't tax me on land I don't own.
Okay, got it. My other question for the assessor, have there been any sales, to your knowledge, within the last 6 to 12 months at Lakeview? And have those, did you take those into account in trying to do your homework for this appeal?
You have a listing of sales, sir, on the right-hand column, and I don't have that in front of me anymore. I gave all my sheets away. So you have one in August of 2018. Got one in November of 18. There have been a few, May of 19. So the answer to your first question is yes. The answer to the second question is no. The sale prices did not impact what we did. These values that we changed on all 64 was not influenced by the sale price, and in some cases their values otherwise would not have changed at all if it had not been for the statutory requirement to split it up among the co-op 64 ways.
Thank you. Any questions from anyone else on the board? And we have a microphone here we'd like you to use to. Go project directly into it.
Mr. Pratt, you indicated that you think this ESA 1610 is flawed and a lot of other places aren't using it. Do you know what method is being used in lieu of this? You want me to answer it?
Sure, if you know, I don't.
We do, actually. We reached out to Milton Co-op, and we have an email response from Milton Co-op that says the co-op covers taxes and homeowner covers their home. There is no tax difference in non-members. We can provide this email exchange. We also reached out to North Avenue Co-op, and they said that they also pay the taxes. The co-op pays the taxes. No individual taxes is assessed like Mr. Nelson. In other words, it's our understanding that throughout the state, and CDI can verify this, they're here in the room, throughout the state, almost every co-op is assessed a single tax, and then that's included in their lot rent. That's our understanding, and that's, again, Mr. Pratt's reasoning.
So, Ted, can you speak to this too? I can't speak to what other communities are doing. I will tell you that when I talked to the employee of the state who helps facilitate the development of co-ops from third-party owners of mobile home parks, he was pretty responsive that there is a state law in place, and it was news to me when I heard about it last fall. And I've talked to the Burlington assessor, and he was not aware of it, and he's been there for 15 or 20 years. And so the North Avenue Park, I have not talked to the Milton assessor, but in my travels, I think this is a new law to many people, whether you're a lister or assessor who do this.
New law that's like
Yeah, exactly. It's the application of it. Yeah.
And so your interpretation is you're applying it because that's what the statute says.
I learned about it, and I said, and discovered that it's required, so. Yes.
Ted, could you ask Julia from CDI about what was just mentioned, how
Yeah,
other
do you mind,
co-ops throughout the state are paying taxes?
Sure. She'll.
So I'm the newest member of the staff. Sorry, Julia Curry with Cooperative Development Institute. Oh,
I'm sorry, have you been sworn?
I was not.
Okay. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give to the board under this matter shall be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do. Excuse me. So I haven't been on staff very long, but my understanding is that there's one resident-owned community of mobile homes in the Brattleboro area that follows the property tax payment process that Mr. Nelson has brought to you. And I don't know of it being brought up with other resident-owned communities around the state. They all were formed after that law was passed. So it's possible that just no one connected those dots. I don't know for a fact.
Mr. Deming.
If a new mobile park came on and contacted you, what would you tell them?
I mean, it's not, so it's really the town's
Well, what would you
obligation to make a
recommend to the
decision. So
town
I would recommend that the assessor look into it. I think that's what I would have to do. It's not my expertise. So I mean, it really seems like the assessors have to come up with a proposal.
I think we need to be mindful of the fact that we should be questioning the witnesses that were called by the parties to the appeal. And this individual was not called by one of the witnesses, and I don't want to open this all the way up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was under the impression Mr. Nelson had introduced
He did.
witnesses.
Did you ask her for this testimony?
Well, I did ask, your name again?
Julia?
I did ask Julia if she would address the question that was brought up on, are there other towns doing CDI, so, but technically it didn't go through me, and I apologize for that, so.
Let's try to keep to that, and although you've now concluded your testimony, I think. Mary?
I have a question of Mr. Nelson.
Okay.
Don't worry, it's okay. Is it your understanding that the reasoning behind the statute, I think I understood you to say that the reasoning behind the statute where the taxes get passed to the members is to avoid the risk that prebates would be denied because the co-op itself would not be entitled to a prebate as a corporation?
I believe that's part of the thinking, but I have not confirmed that. We went through, I am aware that the town of St. George Mobile Home Park of 120 units sold. I wear two hats, and another hat I wear is doing this for a living through a company that is contracted with the town of St. George. They purchased this, the property transfer was March, so they would have had to kick in, but they said they didn't take possession. In meeting with their co-op board, they said that many of the people in that park, before the transfer in the 2016-17 taxes, used to file a renter rebate for the rent they paid, which was, say, $4,000 or $5,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the people who constructed this were sensitive to Act 16 and 68.
Understood. I have two more quick questions for Mr. Nelson, if that's okay. By the 28,700 site improvements, is that allocable to land or to the home and the other improvements such as porches and that kind of thing?
It's from my understanding of the statute, it's the amenities that go with being in that park. Your 1/64th share of ownership of the park.
Okay, understood. And then the last question is, I apologize because this went over my head. I still don't fully appreciate or understand why each lot is being taxed the same amount, even though they have different configurations.
Because we don't have the details of the size, the shape, the actual who's assigned to what.
Why don't you have those details? Sorry to interrupt, but
I'm not sure it's been defined within the park itself. From what I understand, either the previous owner or since the transfer, maybe the co-op board, in some cases has to intervene if neighbors aren't playing well together. You know, they want to put up a fence or something like that. I'm not privy to those details.
so all you're privy to is that there's this
8.6
acres of land.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a piece of land that includes a roadway and 64 sites.
And as far as you know, the co-op process does not include a survey of the boundaries of the individual lots, and there was no pre-existing survey of the individual lots in the town records.
That's, to the best of my knowledge, that's a true statement.
So I've read the statute. I'm not saying it's crystal clear what it means to me. I don't know how much discretion you have, and I don't know how much discretion the Board of Civil Authority has in making these decisions. In general, other than co-ops or mobile home parks, do you usually tax the renters of property or only the owners of property in town?
That's a good question, and the first thing I do is try to define the form of ownership of the property. And a co-op, when I started on this journey 30 years ago or so, there were co-ops in the town of Bridgewater near Woodstock that were owned, and the people owned a share of a corporation, and they considered it a dwelling. And they paid the co-op board a fee for renting it, but when they didn't have property transfer tax returns. So it was a challenge to appraise those properties and come to what was market value, because everything was done privately. And they didn't really own the real estate in the true sense of what a fee simple ownership would be, or even a condo. And this is an equal hybrid where if you want to live in Shelburne Woods or Lakeview, from my perspective, you are an entity within that board, and you have vested interests in that property recognized by the state as part of your ownership. Maybe not exclusive like the mobile home that you own, but you have rights to it that exceed renting that site.
Is there any other property in Shelburne where you're assessing a tax against the renter?
I don't know how do you mean directly to a tenant? The answer would be no.
Okay. Is there any other property in Shelburne that if you're assessing a tax on a property where the property may have a lake view and another property not have a lake view, and you assess the same tax against both properties?
Yes.
And what are they?
The condominiums on Morgan Drive. The value on those condominiums is somewhat tempered by maybe their ability to see the lake, but some of them have absolutely no view of the lake. The new wing that was perpendicular to the lake, 5 out of the 6 have no view of the lake, and the 2 or 3 in the old nursing home have no view of the lake.
Okay. And do they have the same tax as the ones that have a view
The
of the
tax
lake?
is the same, the values are different, because the square footages are different, and some of the qualities of the units are different, but the tax rate is the same.
Tax rate is the same, but
Yep.
is the value different?
The value is different, because those units are different.
So in this case, the value is the same. In that case, the value is different.
But it's not exclusively because of the lake view. It's square
Well,
footage
so is there
and,
any other property where, in Shelburne, where property with lake views that otherwise are the same as properties without lake views have the same value and the same tax?
I would have to say, I didn't set the base in 2008, but I would have to say that some of the lots on Lakeview are analogous to this. If you go up Shelburne Road and take a left across from that little open-faced plaza, that's Lakeview. And some of those houses have no view of the lake, and some of them, maybe down towards the end, seasonally, when there's no foliage, might have a view of the lake over a windmill, which would be very similar to the 2 or 3 that you've heard about tonight. And I don't think there's a significant difference in the value of those sites, but that's single-family detached that's owned in fee. But as far as I can tell, those site values are not significantly different.
Mr. Nelson, could you just shed some light briefly on how the taxes are assessed at the Nashville Mobile Home Park as a point of
Yes,
reference?
That's a single owner, third party, and
Nashville.
that's similar to the way Lakeview used to be, or more appropriately Shelburne Woods used to be when Marvin Thomas owned it, or Mr. Parmalee before it sold to the co-op.
Any last words from Mr. Pratt?
Geez, I mean, I really think I've said it so many times the same way that if
Well,
you
you don't
don't
have to.
own, you don't pay. If you own, you pay. I mean, you know, I don't think all these things about rebates and all that is just smoke in my mind.
But do you think that if you are a member of the co-op, that there is any intrinsic fair market value to your ownership interest in the co-op based upon some allocated portion of the real estate?
Sure, I don't quite
I can
understand what's
answer
your
that.
question.
I understand exactly what your question is. And the answer to that is yes, because I am a member and he is not. So Ted put $28,700 onto the value of my property, my trailer. And that's what I'm now being taxed on. He increased the value, my resale value, $28,700. So yes, by being a member, there is. And Mr. Pratt's point is that he's not a member, so why is he being taxed like he's been, or the previous 10 years, taxes on renters, to your point, sir, that we've been taxed as renters on land that we don't own, amounting to $960,000 a year for 10 years. And now Ted, you know, in his best move, or his best option, is trying to correct that problem. We see that. But Mr. Pratt still, he was grandfathered in as he had the right to be a non-member. When he sells his homes, the new people do not have a right to be non-members. They must become co-op members, and they will benefit at that point in time from the extra 28.7. But as for Mr. Pratt, he does not benefit and should not be taxed.
Okay, I think we may need to seek some, do some legal research of some kind to understand just how this whole membership, non-membership, yeah. Okay.
Mr. Chair, I have a question, Mr. Pratt, please.
Hypothetically, Mr. Pratt, would you object if the co-op raised your rent by the same amount of the tax that the co-op would otherwise have to pay by virtue? I mean, in other words, the co-op seems to be passing along to you a portion of the taxes that it should pay. The reason it's doing so, I surmise from Mr. Nelson's testimony, is so that the members of the co-op can take advantage of prebate programs. So what the co-op has done is reduced your rent dollar for dollar by the amount of tax that's allocable to your lot. Do you agree with that? Has your rent been reduced dollar for dollar by the amount of tax?
I believe so.
Okay.
And I have no problem with it going the other way.
So your problem is more philosophical in nature?
Exactly. I don't own the land. The co-op does. They want to increase my rent to make up for the taxes I don't pay. Go for it.
He'll pay it.
I'll pay for it.
So my question is, if you were to sell one of your units, you would not expect to get either $10,500 and $19,500.
No.
You would
hope they
expect to
more.
get the fair market value of a unit with the right to be on that property. So, and then we know that the next owner would be required to be a member of the co-op. So in other words, you're asking basically not to be assessed on something that you would have every expectation to realize if you were to sell your unit. That's no.
I don't quite understand.
Well, in other words, if you were to sell your unit at fair market value, wouldn't that assume that you're also selling the right to be at that spot?
Yeah, but let me respond to that, because it goes back to lot. My lot's not 1/64th of this thing. My lot is actually less than the average, but I have a deck. I have one of the prettiest lots in the whole park. I'm sure I could get more than its assessed value because I have a great lot. So what do we do with that?
So I'm just
No,
trying to
I'm
clarify
just-
that, because I'm
But I'm
seeing
not
is a
just
little
making money by doing this.
no, but I'm seeing a little bit of in other words, you're not suggesting that you would sell only the unit that sits on the lot. You're suggesting when you sell it, you're selling the unit and the right to be on that lot.
What I sell, I'm going to sell them both together.
Yeah, well, okay.
I do have one question for Mr. Moran that I hope you will indulge me in, and maybe you need to see the bylaws. But Mr. Moran, am I correct in thinking that anybody can opt in or out of the co-op at any time for any reason?
That is correct. Until they come in. So when the co-op was established by state rules in Arthur Hamlin, by Rock rules, by CDI rules, the only ones that cannot be part are the 5 that are grandfathered in as renters. So their renters are not part of the co-op, and the owners are not part of the co-op. Mr. Pratt is an owner in the park, so he opts not to be. Yes, at any time, anybody in the park can opt right now out of being in the co-op. Yes, they can.
May I just add a clarification?
Julia?
Thank you, yes.
Julia, would you like to clarify that?
Thank you. This may already be clear, but in case it isn't. That opportunity, that option exists at the time that a park converts to co-op ownership. It doesn't exist after that.
It sounds like we have conflicting
My
testimony.
concern will clarify that more.
Mr. Moran, would you like to clarify that?
I would love to. So
don't think
Mr.
we're- I
Pratt
don't
was
think we're
actually
receiving
part
clarity.
of the co-op. And he has a letter here dated January 21st, 2018. That's incorrect. We didn't even notify of the park sale until July of 2018, when Mr. Pecor said, selling the park, want to sell it to you first. We met on August 15, decided to incorporate into a co-op, and did so in 7 months, because we knew there were 2 other offers on the table which would have evicted the entire park and go on to something else. So that's why we moved as fast. When we did, Mr. Pratt was part of the co-op. He had paid, I think, his $5 to get in, and then the co-op price is $100. And they could pay $5, then another $25, until we have people still paying to be part of the co-op, but they are members. At some point, for some reason unknown to us, he opted out of being a member of the co-op. But he lives on co-op land that we own. So in essence, he would be our renter now. Did that clean anything
No.
up for you?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I think what we think we heard, at least what I think I heard, is 2 distinctly different testimonies. One, that from you, Mr. Moran, that someone can opt out at any time going forward. And the other testimony was, once the co-op has been established and someone is a member, they can't opt out.
May I clarify mine?
Yes, okay, go ahead.
The people who are living there at the time of conversion have the option to join or not join at any time that they live there. So I wasn't clear. Sorry. Any people who move in once the co-op belongs to once the park belongs to the co-op are required to become members of the co-op. They are not given an option. So, sorry.
And I apologize. I mean, you know, brand new to boards, we have tons of paperwork to read, sometimes between Rock Capital, CDI, and the state. I'm 24 hours a day, doing this, so sometimes I do miss things, and thank you for that clarification. But we had wanted to, because we're a new co-op, it's an elderly co-op, some people don't even have computers, I panicked 6 weeks into it when I thought, we still had people paying the old owner. So I thought, oh my God, now we're gonna have to get them to pay their taxes and explain. So I had gone to Mr. Nelson and said, can we put this off? And he had checked with the town lawyer, and the town lawyer said, no, absolutely. You live in Shelburne, this is the law, you follow the law Mr. Nelson put down, and you are going to do it as of July 1st. So we had no choice as a co-op. We had the money in the budget to just pay the tax, but the town said, no, you can't do that. And Ted and I went back and forth on this, and Ted said, this is what the lawyer said, and we said, okay. If the lawyer said that, then we can't, Shelburne is the same way too. We have to, from the Shelburne town lawyer, have to abide by this tax rule. I don't know what it is like at St. George, or at Milton, or in St. Albans, or, in Ticonderoga. Oh, that's not in Vermont. Okay, that doesn't matter. So, we're doing what, what the town lawyer said you had to do. It would have been much easier for us if we did it the other way, and but we're trying to follow the rules.
I have a question for Mr. Pratt.
Just on.
Oh, you don't want to be taxed on the land you don't own. Do you want to sell the land you don't own?
Can't. How can I sell land I don't own?
Well,
It's
then
just
you
like
can't
how
sell
could I
your
be
trailer.
That's a trailer. I own the trailer.
So you would be selling the
I own the trailer,
only.
but not the land.
And when somebody wanted to buy your trailer, it would have to go off site?
No. Right now, when people buy there, they buy the trailer and a lot. The trailer sits on land that belongs to the trailer, and everything I've seen, there's a certain amount of land around that trailer that's part of your homestead. That's your lot.
So you would be selling a trailer less the value of the land, which you don't own.
Yes, that's correct.
Ted, I got a question for you. Yes, sir. I'm going to go back a little bit to try to get a little foundation for myself here. When Ray Pecor owned the park,
Yes.
did he pay taxes to the town of Shelburne for the land and the trailers?
He did not pay for any of the mobile homes, and we're trained to call them mobile homes. Trailers are in our, but anyway.
Okay.
He did not pay for any of the mobile homes. He may have in the past if he owned one, but recently, in my experience, he did not.
What did he pay for the land?
He paid $1.2 million, yes.
Thank you. Now, question 2.
Yes.
When the co-op changed, who the hell owns the land?
The people who are members of the co-op.
Do they?
Yes.
Okay.
Did you look at me? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to answer out of turn. I can tell the chair, yes, Mr. Chair, the co-op owns the land. All the people, the 57 members, own all the land of the co-op.
And
I
Mr.
think-
Pratt
I
is
think-
not a member.
Right. By his choice.
Yeah, I think this has been the consensus testimony so far, but once the co-op was established, a done deal, anyone who was an owner at that time could opt out of membership in the co-op. But anyone to whom that owner sells cannot.
It's my understanding, sir, that anybody who owned at the time it became a co-op could go in and out at their discretion as long as they own the mobile home.
That's what he said.
And anyone who buys into the park after it converted to a co-op had to become a member of the co-op.
That's it.
Go ahead.
So if the co-op owns all the land, does that mean that anybody from any part of the co-op can go to any part of the land? So if you wanted to go to the lake and watch the sunset, or if somebody wanted to come onto your land and use your deck or hang out in your land, so is it anybody can go in any part since you all own all of the land? Oh, I guess I could ask you to.
That's a
answer.
good question, and if you don't
Yeah.
mind, I'm going to ask Sean Moran
Okay, thank you.
or either Mr. Combs or Mr. Pratt to answer that, because I honestly don't know the answer to that.
I'll address that. First of all, we can't go to the lake. We have us, the railroad, the millionaires, the lake. So that is the delineation of property. So we have no byway to the lake. So nobody can go to the lake. Everybody can stand in the road and see the lake. There are very few that have a lake view. And most of the trees would prohibit anybody but from having a lake view. As to the second question, I wish you hadn't asked that because I really don't know how to answer it. We own all the land, but there are presumed lots. I guess I would liken it to somebody who owned an apartment building and they can walk in the halls and everything but not step into your unit without being invited because the units are owned. Even though the land is the property of the co-op, there's a communal understanding that people have defined spaces. And sometimes that is a huge problem when we've been through litigation with that exact problem. Hi, this person stepped onto my property. It's not your property, it's the co-op's property. So that is a Pandora's box that I don't know how to close. So I'm sorry if that answer wasn't sufficient.
Can I respond to that?
Surely.
I mean, as a resident who has land, everybody, I encourage the people who are going out to ask the owners if they think they have a lot. They don't have a lot. They don't have land in common. They don't go sit on somebody else's lot and watch the sunset or have a beer. They protect, they maintain, they mow, they shovel. They take care of their freaking lot. It's not somebody else's property they go on. It's not land in common. It's not a condo where we have common land that everybody uses to recreate. I totally understand that. This is a lot. From day one, they've been sold to us as lots. Sorry to
Thank
get
you.
someone playing.
I think we're going to conclude the testimony. We've gone on for about an hour and 20
sorry.
minutes. No, this is a case of first impression. We haven't had to do one of these before, so we'll conclude the testimony, close the hearing, and before the evening is done here, a inspection committee of 3 or more members will be appointed. The date for them to have completed their inspection and presented a written proposal for the board's action is August the 5th, 7 p.m. here, where we will reconvene. So thank you for your diligence and patience. Yes, Mike?
The inspection committee, one of the issues was whether or not the size, the amenities of particular lots are relevant. And so this is just my first go around with this. Setting up an inspection committee, does that presume that in fact the answer is yes? Or is this just what we do every time?
The law says we have to do it.
Okay.
And we have to go, one of the things that the inspection committee has to set up and schedule for the convenience of everybody involved is to look at, even though we haven't really heard a lot of testimony about the value of the individual mobile homes, is to look at the mobile home inside and out. And so that has to be scheduled at a time that's convenient for everybody, and ideally at the same time, same day, so that can be done efficiently. And we'll just ask Mr. Pratt to be ready to get a phone call to help set that up in the next couple of days. Okay?
Is there anything that the board would like beyond, I realize you're quasi judicial, you can't do exploratory fact-finding, but you did mention the bylaws. I don't have access to that, but that might be something if you want, or I don't think there's a plat of the 64 lots available, but we certainly, maybe Diana can.
Yeah, there is.
The dimensions of the plats.
There's a plat of the perimeter, only the perimeter.
Right.
Okay.
No dimensions.
And
And
unlike.
we gave you an Exhibit 9.
Yeah.
If you look at Exhibit 9, that's from Chittenden County Regional Planning and VGCI. They've already done it. You know, they've done the plat around the park, and that's in your Exhibit 9, but they have not done the
I don't think
plat.
I don't think that's our
Exactly.
concern. And I take it from what you said, Mr. Nelson, that unlike with a condominium where the bylaws are recorded in the land records, that is not the case with a co-op.
That's my understanding, that they're not public yet. I could be wrong, they could have been recorded, but I don't believe they have been. But we could make them
Yeah,
available.
they're recorded.
The bylaws are recorded,
Sure. With the Secretary of State?
but I mean in the land records.
That I don't.
We can make sure you get a
Well,
copy.
I
you
think
want.
if the bylaws can be made available and distributed to the parties and to the board, that would be appreciated.
Sandy, you got a copy, right?
Yeah, well, she's a Secretary of State, Chair.
Right, but do you have one?
Yeah,
for
we do,
yourself?
sure.
And Mr.
Bylaws
Pratt?
of the co-op, Ted?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's what he's talking about.
I think we need to get one to Diana so she can distribute them to the board, the bylaws.
Email you the bylaws of the
Okay, that concludes the hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you in a
Thank you,
few
folks.
weeks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Pratt.
We'll get through it.
We're taking a 3-minute break. All those in favor of adopting the minutes, raise your hand. Okay, so if there's a majority, people who weren't there and are abstaining didn't vote. How about that?
On the second one, I'm going to abstain, because I wasn't there.
Who else abstained on the 11th? Jamie?
George, you were there. No, I was there for the 11th.
Nancy?
I missed one last week.
I think it's just Laura.
And for June 24th, same people move. All in favor of that, please raise your hand. Anyone opposed? Anyone abstaining?
Abstain.
3 abstentions.
Jamie,
Terrific. The checklist review, we all received, VCAM wants to, they can. No reason not to. You all received the full checklist, the purge checklist, and the potential purge checklist. I know some people sent in to Diane some names of people who on the potential challenge list and on the potential purge list who are definitely either deceased or have moved out of town or both. I did that. Nancy, since you spearheaded this, do you have a suggestion for how we go through this evening in an efficient way?
Well, I spearheaded the discussion about changes or policy, but I think going through each list and asking who has names, because Diana wanted it, right, Diana, you told us not to say anything.
I think the question is the names that should not be challenged or names that should not be purged.
That's what I would like. If we recognize anybody who still lives in town, that I really want to know.
Right, and
Otherwise, I recommend we challenge and purge the people on the list.
That's the name.
We have some, oh, good.
The challenge
Challenge list.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, can we just have a show of hands of how many people have challenges on the potential challenge list? And then maybe those people could be called upon? Because I don't have anyone, so
Okay. I have got names on the challenge list.
I got one.
that should not be
That I think
challenged.
probably should not be.
Okay. Maybe we can address the people who have,
Okay, well, we can, why don't you start there?
Well, Randall Fisher.
I got this one.
he has this one.
Right, but I don't believe,
Okay.
I believe he's still a Shelburne.
Excellent, okay,
George Wilson.
okay.
We have this number two.
These are the challenge.
The two is potential challenge and three.
You have somebody on this.
Well, I'm talking as a potential
No
challenge.
longer in Shelburne, Okay.
Those are two, and I had a couple others that I had questions on that I don't know. Catherine Handy. Possibly, still in here.
Okay.
And Courtney Buffalo, those are the only ones. Those two more questions, these two I'm pretty sure that Buffalo.
So on the potential challenge list, any other members of the board have any names to think?
Now, this is so, tell me again what this is for, Diana?
This
This
is,
particular list?
are people who haven't voted in the last two general elections, and so I'm questioning whether or not they live in Shelburne.
So is this the 4-page one or the 20-page one?
The 20-page one,
Okay. I don't have anybody on that one.
that you recognize is still living in Shelburne.
Right.
Nancy, did you have names?
I didn't know about Pam and George Bissonette, if their primary residence is Vermont, or have they switched that to Florida? I don't know if they, and they were interviewing. Yes.
Okay. I will look into that. Anybody else? Jen?
I think David Borman is still a student and living at home.
Okay. Thank you.
Are you asking for challenges to the challenge or supports of the challenge?
Challenges to the challenge. People, if you see somebody on the list, you say, oh no, they live next door to me, or I know that person still lives here, then I don't want to send them a letter.
Okay, I have people I can confirm aren't in town.
Okay,
That's what I got.
okay.
But you don't want to hear those at this time?
Not yet.
Right.
That was what I was asking Randy.
Randy Bushy.
Randy Bushy,
Yeah.
still lives in Shelburne? Okay. Okay.
And is there, just if this avoids us sending a letter that we don't need to send, if we know for high degree of certainty that they're still here, even if they just haven't voted for a couple of cycles.
I do have one then, and that would be Ryan Gears.
You think he's still in Shelburne?
On Pond Road. At this moment in time, he's definitely on Pond Road.
Is he breathing?
He's breathing.
Okay.
He has a job.
Okay. I won't send them a letter. Thank you.
On the potential purge list, we're looking for people.
Those are people who have been challenged 2 general elections ago, and when I do the batch purge for the state, they will automatically come off. So if you know that they live in Shelburne, then I should unchallenge them and keep them on the list. Then I would like to know that.
So I have a question. David Grover is listed, there is something in the law about if you live in Europe or you live out of the country, okay.
If this is the last place you live,
This, okay.
then he needs to stay on the list. What's his name?
David Grover, so he should not be challenged.
No, we should not, we were talking about purge now.
Keep on the list. I'll check his name. I'll keep on the list. Keep on the list. Okay.
We're still on number 2, right?
I think we had switched.
We're on the
to
purge
Purge.
list.
I've been trying to get them on for years.
We switched to the purge.
So we're on the number of pages of 4?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I got one.
And with this, only people you know are still here.
Okay, this one's gone,
Okay.
like Randy's.
Because we're going to send these people.
Oh, he's going to kind of click on there.
No, they're not getting a letter, they're just getting
Deleted. Okay. So on the, any other purge, potential purgees who you think are still here?
You have 2 other lists, right? One there.
What is the next one?
The new voters. Yeah. Is that list number 4 to that 2016 fully? Okay, Christy Allen has moved last week, and her husband. Christy Allen, her husband. John Street. I'm sorry, John. So I will challenge them, okay?
These are any other people on the third list who you think ought to be challenged?
We don't have a third list. You
There's
only
a tab
have 2.
for.
There's a tab on the,
Right. There was a list of new people who have.
One?
What's the title of the thing we're looking at?
It's tab 4.
So it's,
We got a lot of names on it.
2016 forward, that time.
that's the tab.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have another name that I question if they live in Shelburne. Nancy Clemens Edgerton. Clemens Edgerton? Edgerton. No. They did, but they moved. They're out of state.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if that's what we're doing. We're going through the 2016 forward to see if they're still in Shelburne. Yes.
Yeah, that should be
Are these just people who've registered since 2016? Correct. A lot of people. Yeah. The checklist, it changes almost daily, adding and deleting people.
What's the population today?
We're about 6,300
Oh, that's down a little bit, isn't it?
for voting.
For voting.
6,300 voters, total population.
Oh, 6,300 voters.
6,300 voters.
And Diane, in that tab 4, 2016 forward, I thought Brian Bittner's name spelled with 1 T. Bittner. Not 5.
Getting close to 9 o'clock. Gary and I gotta go.
Yeah, I'm an appointment with my television.
Any other
It's
recent
on PBS.com.
voter registrants who you think should be challenged?
So last night we had
Seeing
I have one more, I'm sorry. Diana, back to the potential, the tab 2, that's the potential challenges. I think Brad Kirby still lives here. Randy, Brad Kirby is still on Pond Road?
I'm sorry, I don't know, I don't live in Pond Road anymore.
I know that.
I've severed all connection.
I won't say.
I don't have a passport.
Yeah, but somebody has facial recognition.
There you go.
Ice and scotch.
anything else for this? In terms of the inspection committee for Lakeview, and I don't disagree with some earlier comments that under the circumstances, inspecting the property for this situation may not have the same significance as it does in a conventional appeal, but the law compels us to do it. This is something that we're going to need to schedule to happen next week or the week after, so that the inspection can be done and work get started on a draft decision and recommendation, so that can be in good enough shape to bring here on the 5th of August. So really, that really eliminates anyone who's not going to be here next week or the week after. And if you wouldn't mind showing of hands, who's not, for whom would doing a site inspection the next 2 weeks, actually it should be this week and next week actually, it would not be good. Nancy, okay. Rebecca?
I could not do it Tuesday through Friday. I'm not back till Sunday, late tomorrow. I won't be back till Sunday.
I'm in the middle of moving.
You want to take out
Stay in
Shelburne?
Yes.
Why did you ask me?
No.
No purging necessary.
You never asked me my name, to just take a challenge.
I'd like to,
David, do this for
this is often done in a group of 3, but I think maybe bumping it up by 1 or maybe 2 would be a good idea. I was thinking it would be myself, Jenny, Bill, Laura, and then is there a volunteer beyond that? Michael?
I'd be willing to do it, but I can't do it this week. But Tuesday through.
We may not be able to schedule it that soon anyways, but that next week would work for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you need an alternate, I'll be the alternate.
Tom, I can not do it until after 2 in the afternoon. If it's during the week.
Okay, that's okay. I think that's manageable. Okay?
So Tom, are we going to look at the recommendations from the subcommittee?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think we should.
When in doubt, make a motion. So could you read through the proposed action for the board in terms of the checklist?
I would like a motion to challenge the people on the potential challenge list, minus or plus the edits we have discussed this evening.
Who made the motion, I'm sorry? Second, okay.
All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. The ayes have it.
I would like a motion to purge the people on the potential purge list, plus or minus the edits we have discussed this evening.
So moved.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. The ayes have it. Anything else?
And then, Nancy, did you want to go over the part about keeping a digital copy or anything?
So Tom had asked some of us, a small group, to work on, a process for how to meet the charge from the state to the VCA, which is to help support, direct the town clerk in maintaining an accurate, recent, authentic, etc., voter registration checklist. So we met on June 17th. I was not here when the VCA met on June 24th, and I think you've heard about some of the recommendations, which then got, a summary was then sent out to you last week, I think. So one of those recommendations we seem to have adopted, which is to have, which is recommendation 2. Did people print out the VCA subcommittee ordinance of
copies.
you want registration checklists or copies over there? But the second recommendation was a process to identify potential voters on our checklist who may be challenged. And we had suggested that the town clerk do what she did. She sent out these 4 lists. So that seems to me to be a recommendation that the VCA adopted as part of our regular process. That's the idea of this, that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Toot our horn, yes, but reinvent the wheel, The first recommendation really reflects the day and age that we are in, which is that the town clerk, as the keeper and does a lot of work on the voter registration checklist, keep a checklist that is downloaded basically from the Secretary of State's website, where it is secure to an extent. Should anything happen to that website, we would be out. We would lose the current voter check like other towns would. So we were thinking it would be a good idea that the voter, that Diane, the town clerk, download Shelburne's most recent voter registration checklist from the state monthly to our own drive. And I don't believe there's any direction from the state as to the frequency of doing that. I don't know, Diana, if there is any direction even about doing it. I think most likely that will come as everybody tries to secure their important demographic information, etc. So that's one part of this. The second is that we keep the voter registration checklist for 12 months on our town drive. We do that. Diana can answer questions about what is the town drive, etc. So that means it would be a moving target. It would be kept for 12 months. 13th month, the oldest month's list would be deleted, and the newest month's list would be added. And that keeping a digital copy only is sufficient, provided there's a backup for it. And that the town clerk, there's 4 parts to this, should continue to store a paper copy of the voter registration checklist in our vault as is currently done. And it would be the certified voter registration checklist, which is after each election. It's kept for 5 years. And the Secretary of State's office creates a statute about how long that voter registration checklist should be kept. So D is essentially continuing to do a practice that Diana already does, hard copy, paper copy, required by the state, kept for 5 years. A, B, and C refer to what do we want to do about keeping it current, and it changes daily. That doesn't mean that our town clerk's office has to attend to it every single day, but there can be, it's easy to get on the list. You can see it's hard to get off. So we thought it was time to address what to do about keeping things current, keeping digital copy. So that's where we are. Anybody have anything?
I think he said that it will be downloaded to the town drive. I'm not sure exactly what that means. I've been working with Philadelphia and a number of municipalities across the country whose websites have been hacked and essentially shut down. And if if Philadelphia can get hacked, Shelburne could go to hack.
Yes, can the Secretary of State's office.
And can the Secretary of State's office. I like the idea, but I wonder, if instead of, I don't know how secure the town website is, but I wonder if Diana could download it to a thumb drive or whatever, and lock that in the vault, that might be more secure.
I don't know that some thumb drives are particularly secure.
Well, I'm not the expert, so someone, something other than downloading it to the town website.
No, it's not the website.
The town server. Something other than the town server should be explored. That's all I'm saying. I don't know the exact answer.
Diana, do you know how other material that is being downloaded or is currently on the town server gets backed up and gets handled?
Yeah, Peter does a backup. He keeps it on a drive and we keep the drive involved.
This is proposing three things, is that we keep it on our town drive, we keep it in the cloud, or somehow off premises, and we have a hard drive.
And we have all the registration forms. Everybody's filled out and submitted to get all this to be able to.
The one thing I know is I'm not the expert and I have a best concern. That I'm just throwing out the problem. That could be a problem.
Does the,
May I say a suggestion? I think if you could go on to the third, fourth, and fifth things, I think what we can do is do some more work on this, bring a revised draft back that hopefully we can act on August 5.
I don't know,
I can ask some other towns what they do.
well, other towns what we do, and I think we need somebody with expertise on securing sensitive.
Maybe ask Simquest is our IT people. I can ask Simquest too.
So, yes, Tom, I agree with you. I think there's more research, we don't have the expertise here. I think we could act on D, the paper copy, if you're comfortable with that.
We're doing it anyway.
Yeah, no, we're doing it anyway, so, okay. We want that done. 2 we've already done. 3 is, there is a requirement by the state that a challenge letter be sent. There is a template suggested on the Secretary of State's website for the wording of that challenge letter. That's what's currently being used, and we recommended with discussion with that that it continue to be used. So perhaps we should do these piece by piece. They're all interrelated.
What I'm thinking is that we put this through another draft, bring it back on August 5, and take final action on this then as a whole.
And then maybe Kate will have the Manfred Mass information. She
Okay.
didn't have that yet, but she's still looking into that.
Okay. So we'll do that. So basically from the 5 recommendations, we've acted on 2. A process for identifying voters who can challenge, we just did it. Number 4, we charged Diana, which we needed to do, this is required by law, to send out those challenge letters. And the requirements for who might be challenged are taken from what's required by the state. We can add to that, but we can't do anything less than this. So we've already done that. And 5 was we also, as a board, charged Diana, town clerk, to do the batch purge with, as she moved in the motion, this move, plus or minus the recommendations to 4 and 5 that we brought up with the meeting. So 1 and 3 would continue to be worked on. The only thing, Tom, is I'm not back until the very beginning of August, so I don't know if 2 days if I can do it.
Well, I have some stuff I'll send to you, and we'll see how we do. One of my things I think is that there are some places here where it directs the town clerk to do what the law requires the town clerk to do. I might want to make that distinction a little bit different. Thanks for the subgroup's work. This is very helpful, and this is a good collaborative way of making a group decision really right on this way.
So does the law state that it has to be 2 election cycles? Is that from the law? That is. And
What's interesting is they don't seem to care about primary elections, general elections, and general elections.
Hard to get off, easy to get on, which.
Move to adjourn. There it is. I got 2 of them right down here.
Okay. All in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no.